They say that long before the first human campfire was lit in that remote stretch of forest, golden eyes were already watching every movement in the shadows. It was the Golden Jaguar, a creature so rare that few believed it truly existed. Among the elders of the village, it was said that her fur reflected the sunlight like polished gold, and that her footprints only appeared to those who respected wildlife. For dishonest hunters, illegal loggers, or anyone daring to harm the balance of the forest, she was a ghost, appearing without warning, disappearing without a sound, leaving behind only the terror in the eyes of those who saw her. But for those who came in peace, the jaguar was a sign of luck and protection. Stories were passed down from generation to generation. Some swore they had seen her shadow cross the river under the morning light, while others claimed to have found the body of a fallen hunter, with no visible injuries, but with an inexplicable fear frozen on his face. The legend grew, wrapped in mystery, until it became almost a protective spirit of the region. The most devoted to the forest left discreet offerings, ripe fruit, fresh game meat, and even flowers, as a silent tribute to the guardian. No one knew for sure if it was mere superstition, or if the jaguar truly understood this silent pact, but the fact was that, from time to time, new reports emerged, and they all spoke of the same thing: the feeling of being watched, but without feeling threatened, as if an invisible protector was always nearby. They arrived when the afternoon was already sinking into copper tones, the sky filtering warm light through the tall, ancient canopy that formed a living roof above the trail. The father, Lucas, carried the heaviest backpack with a stove top and a first aid kit he checked as if in prayer. The mother, Helena, wore a compass around her neck and carried a notebook where she recorded birds, flowers, and small details that a trained eye would never miss. The daughter, Nina, walked in the middle, alert to every crack and every shadow, holding a child's binoculars she insisted on using even when things were far too close to need magnification. The trail ended at a river bend where the water ran calm and clear, reflecting a mosaic of branches and leaves. The air smelled of wet earth and freshly wounded bark. Just a few steps away, a clearing protected by a crown of ferns seemed to have been waiting for them since the beginning of the world. There, with coordinated and silent gestures, they began to set up camp, the tarp anchored between two crooked trunks, the ropes pulled taut until they hummed, the tent inflating with air like a satisfied chest, and the backpacks lined up beneath the protection of exposed roots that looked like giant fingers gripping the soil. While the stove hissed, trying to catch flame, the soft crackle of the first sparks brought an immediate comfort, the kind of warmth that explains why you came so far. Lucas marked a simple perimeter with discreet ribbons, not out of fear of animals but out of respect, where not to step, where not to touch, where the forest deserved absolute silence. Helena boiled water in bottles, portioned out food, and sealed the leftovers in bags to avoid night visitors. Then she sketched the outline of a bromeliad in her notebook, one that collected tiny pools of water for unseen frogs. Nina roamed around collecting small treasures: a metallic blue feather, a perfectly curved twig, a smooth stone that fit exactly in the palm of her hand. From time to time, a flock of parakeets would cut across the treetops with mocking cries, the sound trail fading until it became a memory. The wind carried a symphony of frictions, leaves scraping leaves, bark knocking against bark, and beneath it all, there was a deep pulse, almost like a heart buried under roots, something only those who stayed quiet long enough could hear. But not everything was harmony. Discreet signs were scattered like messages for those who knew how to read them. At the start of the trail, Lucas had noticed tire tracks pressed into fresh mud. Near the river, an old saw blade had bitten through a trunk, leaving irregular teeth marks. At the base of a palm tree lay a crushed can and a piece of blue plastic the forest hadn't yet swallowed. He gathered what he could, stored it in the trash bag, and chose not to mention it, though the look he exchanged with Helena said everything. As night approached, it brought with it a subtle change in the forest's behavior. The insects fine-tuned their buzzing, the branches seemed to bow, and even the river, in certain stretches, flowed more quietly, as if it wanted to listen. Helena suggested keeping the fire low, not out of needless fear, but to let the darkness remain the darkness. Sitting on a rolled-up jacket, Nina heard a distant dry snap that didn't match any animal's sound, and before her father could say anything, a group of capybaras dashed across the opposite bank, drawing parallel lines in the water that quickly dissolved. When the moon rose behind the leaves, silvering the ground with irregular patches. The campsite looked like a small island surrounded by an ocean of shadows. Lucas mentally retraced the escape routes, measured distances with his eyes, and adjusted the pocket knife as if arranging his thoughts. Helena braided extra cords into the tarp, checked the simple radio they carried for emergencies, and sketched a minimal map with 3 arrows: river, trail, north. Nina fell asleep before hearing the end of the story her mother was telling, a story about respect and ancient pacts, hugging the binoculars as if they were a talisman. And while the fire breathed low, 2 eyes watched from a distance, high as if floating above the vegetation. They were not eyes of fear, nor of hunger. They were eyes that measured. The silence surrounding them lacked the coldness of predators or the haste of men. It was an attentive, ancient silence, the kind that learns the pace of every family that enters and decides whether they belong there. The forest had registered their arrival, and farther ahead, where the trail opened again, other footprints, not of an animal, waited for the right moment to return. Nightfall in the forest always brought an almost imperceptible change to those unfamiliar with it, but Lucas and Helena, attuned to its signs, felt the weight of that silence. It was not the natural pause between the sounds of day and the arrival of those of the night. It was a hiatus, a soundless vacuum that seemed to hold the forest's breath. The hum of insects had dwindled, the croak of frogs had ceased, and even the river, restless during the day, now dragged its waters with unusual care. The shadows deepened not only from the absence of light, but as if something invisible occupied the empty spaces between the trees. Nina, still drowsy, asked why the forest was too quiet, and Helena, with a soft yet firm tone, replied that sometimes the forest rested, though she knew deep down this was not rest, but attention. As they prepared to settle in, a dry snap sounded just a few meters away, not like the rustle of a small animal, but the weight of a foot crushing dry branches. Instinctively, Lucas lifted the flashlight, but instead of revealing the source, the beam was swallowed by a low mist that had appeared without warning. The smoke from the fire lay close to the ground, moving in strange directions as if being guided. Helena exchanged a quick look with her husband, a silent gesture saying more than words. Something, or someone, was there. A faint breeze brought an unusual smell, a mixture of oxidized metal and old oil, an aroma that did not belong to the forest's natural cycle, but to human machines and weapons. Now fully awake, Nina moved closer to her mother, who pulled her in gently. Lucas dimmed the fire to just weak embers, trying to hide the campsite's position. Far away, too far for the flashlight to reach, a golden glint shone for an instant between the foliage. Not the reflection of metal, but of eyes. 2 fixed, unmoving eyes watching. There was no immediate threat in that gaze, but there was calculation, measurement, a silent acknowledgement. And almost at the same moment, another sound broke the air, the muffled roll of tires on wet earth, accompanied by idle metallic clicks like weapons being checked. The sounds came from different directions, closing in an invisible circle. The night, which until then carried mystery, now had a palpable tension. The forest, which during the day had welcomed them with warm birdsong and the wind's melody, now seemed to warn that the territory was about to be contested. And somewhere, so close its breath could be felt in absolute stillness, the Golden Jaguar waited, not as a hunter seeking prey, but as a sentinel, deciding whether this family was worthy of her ancestral protection or whether their fate had already been sealed by the men approaching. The first sign was not a gunshot or a shout. It was the slow rip of a tent zipper being opened without permission. Lucas reacted before he even understood, spinning on his heels and lifting the flashlight, but a cold metallic gleam in the darkness stole his voice. A gun pointed directly at him, reflecting light like a dead eye. Outside, heavy footsteps crushed dry leaves, not with the silent precision of seasoned hunters, but with the insolent rhythm of those who see themselves as owners of the land. Helena instinctively pulled Nina behind her, shielding her, while trying to count how many there were. The answer came quickly, at least 5, spread in a half-moon around the campsite. The intruders' flashlights sliced through the forest in nervous white beams, revealing long guns, overstuffed backpacks, and belts lined with hunting knives. Their faces, covered with dirty cloths, showed only hard eyes, trained to intimidate. One of them, the tallest with a scar cutting across his eyebrow, stepped forward and kicked the stove, scattering embers across the ground. The sound was sharp, but the silence that followed was heavier than any threat. No demands, no words, just dominance through fear. Another, crouched near Lucas's backpack, began rummaging through everything, tossing clothes, maps, and Helena's notebook to the ground as if each item were trash. Lucas kept his body upright, though his heart pounded in heavy blows. He knew reacting would be an invitation to death. Helena, eyes fixed on the man with the scar, calculated distances, spotted openings but saw no safe routes. Nina, hidden behind her mother's legs, clutched the binoculars to her chest as if they were a shield. The crouching man found Lucas's pocket knife and smirked, twirling it between his fingers before slowly and provocatively tossing it into the river. The message was clear: disarm and humiliate. Then came the sound that broke the pattern. It was not human, nor was it the wind. A sharp crack of branches followed by a deep, prolonged exhalation like a muffled drum. The smugglers' flashlights turned in unison toward the darkness on the right, where a shape moved low, heavy, and precise. Two golden eyes glowed, still for a fraction of a second before disappearing again. The scarred man raised his weapon, but something in his expression betrayed discomfort. He knew what was out there. The silence split in two. On one side, the controlled noise of the armed men, on the other, the steady breathing of a presence that could not be fully seen, but filled the air like electricity before a storm. Helena felt her skin prickle and understood this was no casual encounter. The forest, which had seemed cornered moments before, now had a hidden ally, a predator that had chosen this moment to appear. The smugglers did not retreat, but the tension shifted. It was no longer just the family being watched. They too were being measured by something the jungle had known and respected far longer. The air seemed to tighten before anyone could react. Between two twisted trees emerged the figure that, until then, had lived only in whispered legends: the Golden Jaguar. Her body was a living mosaic of muscle and light, her fur patterned with black rosettes that reflected the amber glow of the flashlights, returning it with an almost supernatural intensity. Her eyes, a deep gold, did not blink. They were like two small suns, steady, slicing through the darkness like hot blades. Her movement was slow, deliberate, almost silent, save for the rhythmic sound of her paws crushing wet leaves. She did not roar, did not charge. She advanced with the certainty of one who knows exactly what she is doing. The smugglers glanced at each other, hesitant, as if for a moment their confidence dissolved. The scarred man, trying to regain control, raised his gun and muttered a muffled curse. In response, the jaguar snapped her jaws once, a dry sound carrying pure threat. In an instant, she shifted to the side, vanishing among the ferns and reappearing just meters from another intruder, fast enough to make him instinctively stumble back. It was not an attack. It was a dance of intimidation, a silent encirclement meant to fracture the group's confidence. Lucas seized the opening to push Helena and Nina toward a narrow path between bushes. His heart raced, but each step was measured to avoid drawing attention. The jaguar, as if sensing his intent, positioned herself to shield the family from view, moving like a living shadow between them and the armed men. One smuggler tried to circle around, but a quick leap from the jaguar, her claws slicing the air just inches from his face, sent him retreating with a stifled cry. The air became a battlefield of invisible forces. On one side, the predator's instinct and the strategic intelligence of the Golden Jaguar. On the other, the greed and brutality of the invaders, now mingled with fear. The flashlights trembled in their hands, casting dancing shadows that made the jaguar seem larger, denser, almost a living fragment of the forest itself. The family, crouched and silent, moved forward through the corridor the beast had created. And in that moment, Lucas and Helena understood this was no coincidence. The guardian of the forest was not merely passing through. She had chosen to intervene. The forest plunged into a dense darkness, broken only by the wandering beams of the smugglers' flashlights and the distant glimmer of eyes that appeared and vanished like living embers. The sound of leaves underfoot became almost a scream in the silence, betraying every step. The Golden Jaguar was not merely an animal fleeing or attacking. She was shadow and wind, appearing always where least expected, controlling the rhythm of the chase. The family moved through thick vegetation, guided by Lucas, who recalled the mental map he had made hours earlier. Helena held Nina's hand tightly, but without frightening her, as if it were possible to transmit safety in that green inferno. Behind them, muffled voices multiplied, mixing quick orders and curses. From time to time, the sharp crack of a gunshot split the night, sending sleeping birds bursting into noisy flocks that quickly vanished into the canopy. The jaguar appeared and disappeared at calculated intervals, always between the intruders and the family, sometimes snapping her jaws, sometimes releasing a deep, prolonged growl that vibrated in the chest of anyone who heard it. One of the men tried to cut across the side to shorten the pursuit. The move was stopped by a leap so quick, the arc of the feline's body was barely seen. A flash of claws, a muffled cry, and the man stumbled back, tripping over roots and disappearing into the undergrowth, carrying with him the metallic scent of blood. The chase led them to a section where the forest closed in like a tunnel of branches and vines. Here, the flashlight beams turned diffuse, and sight became useless. Smell and hearing took over, and this was territory where the Golden Jaguar reigned. Her steps broke no branches, sank into no mud, yet they were always close enough to be felt, like a warm breath on the back of the neck. The scarred man, now less confident, turned in circles trying to track the invisible enemy. Each time he spun around, he saw only shadows and that persistent golden glow in the dark. Lucas, realizing the jaguar was drawing the intruder's attention and gunfire, quickened his pace and motioned with his hand toward a narrow detour to the left. Helena followed, shielding Nina with her body, as the sound of another gunshot echoed behind them, not aimed at them but at the feline shadow playing the game of hunting hunters. The forest, once threatening, now seemed like an accomplice, closing in behind them as if erasing their tracks. And without fully realizing it, each member of the family began to understand. This hunt was not only to save their lives, it was also to prove that the legend of the guardian of the forest did not live on stories alone. It lived on blood, courage, and sacrifice. The run seemed endless, but at some point in the forest, where trees became walls and roots rose like barricades of wood, the family found themselves trapped. The narrow corridor they had followed ended at a wet, slippery slope with the roaring river far below. Lucas looked around, searching for any way out, but all he saw were shadows and the trembling beam of a smuggler's flashlight closing in from the rear. Helena pulled Nina close, her body already prepared to serve as a shield, even knowing that against firearms it meant little. Then from the opposite side of the enemy, the Golden Jaguar appeared again, not with the calculated slowness of her earlier entrances, but with the urgency of one who knows time is running out. The flashlight's beam caught her eyes, and for an instant, it reflected an almost human glint, decision. She was there not to threaten or distract, but to choose her side. With a roar so deep it seemed to make the trees tremble, she placed herself between the family and the line of fire. Her tail lashed the air, her arched back signaled maximum tension, and every muscle vibrated as if ready for the final explosion. The smugglers hesitated. The scarred man raised his weapon but did not fire immediately. Perhaps it was instinct, perhaps a sudden awareness that facing this beast meant stepping into a fight the jungle had already decided. The jaguar took 2 slow, heavy steps forward, emitting a low, continuous sound that was not merely threat, it was warning. Lucas understood that this was their only opening. He grabbed Helena's hand and motioned for her and Nina to run to the side, where a fallen tree created a precarious bridge over the slope. While the family escaped along the flank, the jaguar kept her eyes locked on the enemies, moving to block any attempt at pursuit. The wind carried the acrid scent of gunpowder and sweat, and she did not retreat. Deep down, she seemed to know she would not leave unscathed, but it did not matter. Between her predator's instinct and something deeper, almost spiritual, she had made her choice. The lives of those humans were now under her protection, and in the silent language of the forest, that was a pact broken only with blood. The first shot rang out like a muffled thunderclap, tearing through the silence and sending a flurry of birds bursting from the treetops. The Golden Jaguar dodged instinctively, the bullet splintering thick bark from a tree behind her. In a precise leap, she closed the distance between herself and the scarred man, knocking him backward into the soaked earth. Her claws passed within inches of his face, and the roar she unleashed made the air vibrate, mixing fear and adrenaline in all who heard it. 2 other smugglers closed in from the side, firing simultaneously. The jaguar spun with lightning speed, taking a grazing shot to her shoulder and another that barely clipped her hind leg. Even wounded, she maintained the pressure, alternating between quick charges and calculated retreats. always preventing anyone from approaching the direction the family had fled. The flashlights, swinging frantically, created chaos of light and shadow that deepened the panic among the intruders. The scarred man managed to get back on his feet, but the scent of his own fear clung to him. He barked orders, trying to rally his group, but the jaguar gave them no time. With an explosive lunge, she struck the nearest man, knocking him to the ground with the force of the impact. His cry was swallowed by the jaguar's deep, continuous growl, her teeth bared, her eyes blazing like two living embers in the dark. Lucas, already on the other side of the fallen tree, looked over his shoulder, witnessing the scene with a crushed heart. He knew this was not an even fight. The jaguar was alone against guns, and every second she bought for the family cost her energy and blood. Helena, panting, held Nina close to her chest, guiding her up the steep slope without letting her see what was happening behind them. The metallic sound of a magazine being changed broke the sequence, and the jaguar understood the next volley could be fatal. Still, she did not retreat. On the contrary, she stepped forward, as if daring the men to cross the invisible line she had drawn, and in that moment, even the hardest hearts hesitated, because what stood before them was not merely a predator, but the very spirit of the forest, ready to fight to her last breath. The darkness began to give way, and a faint light filtered through the canopy, tinting the low mist that crawled along the ground with gold. The timid song of a lone bird seemed to announce that daybreak was near, but in that part of the forest, time moved to a different rhythm. Each second pulsed like a sharp blow. The golden jaguar was already bleeding from more than one wound, in her shoulder, in her hind leg, and now in her left flank where a bullet had pierced muscle and ribs. Even so, she remained standing, firm, like a living wall between the family and the intruders. The smugglers, exhausted and caked in mud, no longer advanced with the same conviction. The scarred man, panting, raised his gun for the final shot, but the jaguar lunged before he could take aim. The impact was brutal, sending them both to the ground, covered in leaves and roots. The weapon fell several meters away, and the man rolled, trying to recover, but the gaze he met was not that of an animal about to kill from hunger. It was that of a warrior, about to fulfill her mission, even if it cost her own life. Two more shots rang out from other positions. The jaguar arched her back, staggered, but kept herself between the men and the escape route. Behind her, Lucas had already led Helena and Nina to a safe point on the trail, from where they could run to reach the riverbank, and from there the narrow road to the village. Helena looked back, and for an instant, her eyes and the jaguar's met. There was no fear, only a silent recognition, a thank you that needed no words. The light of dawn grew stronger, spilling over the jaguar's fur in a golden glow that made her seem part of the rising sun itself. Blood, mixed with earth, formed patterns that resembled ancestral markings. One final roar echoed, deep and powerful, carrying enough force to scatter what remained of the smugglers' courage. They retreated, not out of mercy, but because they understood there was no victory to be had there. When the family finally disappeared among the trees, the golden jaguar stepped back, breathing with difficulty. The wind carried the fresh scent of morning, mixed with the iron of blood. She lifted her head, watching the brightening sky, as if confirming that her duty was done. Then, in an almost solemn gesture, she closed her eyes and lay down, her body blending into the forest she had always protected. The first light of day kissed her motionless back, and in that moment, the legend was no longer just a story. It was truth carved into the ground, the air, and the memory of those who lived to tell it. The sun had fully broken the horizon when Lucas, Helena, and Nina reached the village, covered in mud, scratches, and a heavy silence that spoke more than any scream. The familiar faces of the villagers approached, forming a circle of curiosity and concern. But the family could barely speak. The words were stuck in their throats, carried on images that would not stop replaying. It was only when one of the elders, a man with calloused hands and eyes clouded by age, asked in a low voice, "Did you see it?" that Lucas managed to answer with a nod. He didn't need to say the name. Everyone knew who it was. The news spread through the village like wind. The guardian of the forest had appeared again, and this time not only as a shadow or a myth, but as a true protector of human lives. Children listened to the account with wide eyes, and the elders told old stories, now reinforced by living proof. Helena, sitting in the shade of a veranda, calmly described every detail: the golden shine of the fur, the precision of her movements, the unwavering courage. Nina, clutching her binoculars, said he had looked at her as if to say he would take care of everything, and no adult had the heart to correct her. Days later, Lucas returned alone to the part of the forest where he believed the final confrontation had taken place. The ground still bore signs, crushed leaves, deep claw marks in the trunk of a tree, and farther ahead, footprints that led away until they vanished near the riverbed. Beside one of those marks, he found a tuft of golden fur, already dry and stiff. He placed it in a small cloth pouch, not to show off, but to keep as a private reminder of what he had witnessed. As the years passed, the story took on an almost sacred tone. The place where the jaguar had fallen came to be avoided by hunters, not out of physical fear, but out of respect, as if it were inviolable territory. The villagers began leaving simple offerings along the riverbank, fruits, flowers, and small wooden carvings of felines, and on full moon nights, some swore they could hear, far away, a deep roar, not of threat, but of warning. The forest still had eyes. For Lucas, Helena, and Nina, there was no longer any doubt. The Golden Jaguar had not only been a guardian that day, but a living link between the human and the wild, a reminder that true courage does not choose species. And whenever the dawn bathed the forest in shades of gold, they knew that in some way the guardian was still there, not as a legend, but as a presence.